Thanks for tuning in to RougeRadio.com. Show 27 of 2012 brought to you this week by Ketter.com, a new solution to your fence ideas. This week on CFL News, Jenn talks with Matt Scianitti, Grey Cup writer for CFL.ca, to recap division finals for Montreal and Vancouver, then preview the 100th Grey Cup game in Toronto. On Canadian University Football News, Kevin talks with Donnovan Bennett from The Score to recap the weekend's bowl games and to preview the Vanier Cup. Show 27 kicks off. Hot! Hey, you. Yeah, you with that sandpaper and paintbrush getting ready to sand and paint that wooden fence again this year, when you could be sitting back, relaxing on your patio and watching your neighbors do that work. Get rid of that wood fence and easily install a new low-maintenance resin fence that lasts. Visit Ketter.com, Keter.com, for videos, product information, and more. You can find this fence at some Costco's across North America and always at Costco.ca with shipping right to your door. Ketter.com.
RougeRadio.com. Jenn, wrapping up the East and West finals with Matt Scianitti, who will be covering the Grey Cup for CFL.ca. Hi, Matt.
Jen, I still don't believe that you're sober after that first game. But you know what? I will take it. You know what? I'll take it on your merit, and you went ahead and said you're not. So I'll believe you because you were. You know what? Honestly, have one for me because as we were talking about off air, it's great to see. There's a sentimental value having the Argos in the Grey Cup, no doubt about it. But it's great to see two different teams and two fantastic stories. You know, the Argos and Scott Milanovich, I think, who now deserves to be head coach of the year, and there's no doubt in my mind. And then to see Calgary get the recognition it deserves after all it's had to deal with on and off the field. It's two really awesome games this weekend.
Well, and I mean, I like it because it's a repeat of the 1991 Grey Cup, which is the first Grey Cup that I have a really good memory of.
Yeah.
That I have a strong memory of sitting and watching and being very interested in the game.
Yeah.
So I like historical rematches. I do. Nothing against David Braley, but I'm kind of glad it's not the Braley Bowl, just because it would give some people way too much fodder for the week, and so.
You know, there will still be people, and this is nothing to disrespect a lot of journalists and a lot of columnists in Toronto that I hold in high esteem, but they will still say something. There will still be something said about Ricky Ray and about this plan, and I know one particular columnist who I will not name, who I do have a lot of respect for. I still score him at one column he wrote last year, implying that the whole thing was a setup, the Ricky Ray deal, or he's implying that all of the factors look suspicious. There still will be people who will say that, and I think that takes away from what an accomplishment it was. And I know we'll get into that, but there's no doubt about it. This Argo win was a complete win, even though Ricky Ray had a hell of a game.
Yeah, it was, and it was a team effort. I mean, that's saying just that despite some really classic screw ups on the part of the Argos. Like there were a lot of times in that first half where I was thinking they didn't even want to win this game.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, at this point, I think we've learned 7 weeks of this season that the Argos, they almost have to start the game 10 points down after giving up particularly, over 70 yards rushing before they actually clue in that it's time to tackle. It just seemed like they were out of sorts a bit, and maybe just the size of the moment was getting to them a bit, and I'm talking specifically about the tackling on the second level, particularly what is, I think, the best linebacking core in the league, and Marcus Ball, Brandon Isaac, and Robert McEwen. They had some terrible tackling. They made Chris Jennings look fabulous in that first quarter. But, again, it's just that kind of – there wasn't a seminal moment like Corey Boyd fumbling this week, but there was just that calmness every time Ricky came on the field. And I spoke to the right tackle Chris Manziel about this week, and he told me honestly, I said, what's been the secret? Why all of a sudden now? And he just looked at me and said, we've got Ricky Ray. We have got a guy back there who just is so calm. He, no matter what the score is, he is not gonna. He's not demonstrative either way, not emotional either way. He just basically goes out there and he does his work, and I think that finally has seeped into the way everybody's thinking, and that pretty much showed throughout the first half. Although, regardless of the 200 and some odd yards that Ricky put up, the fact is that the Argos couldn't punch it in, and when you see that horrid, and I think we'll all kind of look at Scott Milanovich this week and kind of raise our eyebrow, but when you look at that horrid play calling that they had in the second quarter, right close to the Alouettes goal line, to have Jarius Jackson come out 3 straight plays, and Jarius has not looked good in short yardage in the last 2 weeks, and have him just look out of sorts, confused, have Chad Cackard look confused. I really thought that the game was going to be over because it was such an important play, and the Argos had given up 3 turnovers after that point. But just Ricky coming out, playing solid, playing determined, and then to have Chad Owens be the beneficiary of so many big plays. That 101-yard drive to start the second half, with Owens having, I think, like 98 yards in that drive, was just spectacular. I mean, this game was won not just by Ricky Ray, but the influence that he had on his team, and above all else, you can see now that they're buying into what Scott Milanovich is preaching, and it's so much credit, regardless of how many column inches are put towards Ricky Ray and the deal and whatever machinations there were in the off season. So much credit has to be given to Scott Milanovich, and this is not to sound like a homer, but the guy has done a hell of a job.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think he should be out. I think he is Coach of the Year. There are a lot of people who disagree, though, and who are making cases for Coach Benavides, or even John Hufnagel, who had to work with a backup quarterback. But
and I don't mean to interrupt you about that, Jen, but I just want to make it clear to all your listeners. With all due respect, and I have I won't say that I'm best friends with Mike Benavides, but I have a pretty strong connection with Coach Benavides, and with all due respect to him, he inherited a plug-and-play, ready-made lineup that was full of veterans and full of talent. Although at the end, the question marks that people have been asking all year about their effectiveness and execution in particular times in the game did ultimately cost them a chance at the Grey Cup. And you look over at John Hufnagel, with all due respect to him again, there are a lot of veterans on that team. He dealt with a tremendous amount of injuries, and I absolutely think he should be a finalist. If not, maybe the Coach of the Year as well. But the fact is, Scott Milanovich came in with new players in every facet of his team, and most importantly, rookies in every facet in all 3 phases of his team. And he made it work. And not only did he make it work, but when you really think of what a Coach of the Year does, how he throughout the year has to adapt and change and really adjust certain parts of his team and deal with a number of little adversities, John Hufnagel has had to do that. There's no doubt about it. But Scott Milanovich being a rookie coach with all the new pieces he had to come and a relatively new coaching staff to come in and do what he's done, the way he's influenced that team, especially after they lost 5 of 6 games going into the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, when they could have clinched first place in the East and they didn't. How he adjusted to that adversity and how his team has now won 4 straight games, I think is just fantastic, and really, to me, epitomizes what a Coach of the Year stands for.
I agree. I was just kind of playing the devil's advocate, because I've seen a lot of info out on the internet and Twitter specifically that's saying that we can't just crown Milanovich, and that would be final crown or the final jewel in the crown of the league giving the Argos the 100th Grey Cup, which I don't think the league is. I think people are giving the league far more power than they actually have. Yeah,
you know what? Honestly, listen, I know we're starting off with the Argos, and you and I are both based in the Greater Toronto area. But people in other parts of the country, and I know I'm not going to get a lot of fans by saying this, they just have to get over it. The Argos earned their place in the 100th Grey Cup. And you know what? You want to blame anybody? Blame Eric Tillman. He made a disastrous decision. And I would find it hard to believe, regardless, and people can tweet me and they can email me or they can call me out all they want, but I would find it very hard to believe that Eric Tillman back last December decided to firebomb his career by sending Ricky Ray to Toronto because of some grand plan that David Braley and Mark Cohan knew that was going to all come together for Toronto. The fact is Scott Milanovich came in December 1st. Yes, was there a bit of scheming on Jim Barker's part and maybe Scott Milanovich's part to bring Chris Jones into the fold? Absolutely, and they got punished by the league. But all the pieces, all the parts that went into this Toronto team, not only from the offensive side, but particularly from the defensive side, Chris Jones on December 5th went out and started his training camps and his scouting camps across the southern United States to get new players in. I'm not being a booster for the Toronto Argonauts. These are facts. That's just the way it is. Now, do I think the Argos are going to win the 100th Grey Cup? I don't know. Honestly, this Calgary team has not gotten enough credit for what it has done through this year and could easily come into Toronto and handily beat the Argos, particularly how the Argos just commit errors, mistake after mistake. But the fact of the matter remains that Scott Milanovich and Jim Barker and defensive coordinator Chris Jones have done a tremendous job, and people just have to get over it. They earned their spot in the 100th Grey Cup. Nobody handed anything to them.
Agreed. And I think if anyone who's kind of going through the conspiracy theories, really, I'm sorry, but you need to have something better to do with your time.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
It's too small a league, and the league's not going to ruin its credibility by pushing one team. Yes, it is very good for the league that the Argos are in the 100th Grey Cup. It was not completely necessary. The game was already sold out. It's not like you're waiting on tickets. And that's, it's the same thing. Yes, it's still a home field advantage, but it's not as much as a home field advantage. Grey Cups are never a huge home field advantage because they are sold out so far ahead of time and to a lot of people from across the country.
And you know what? You want to think of it like this. John Hufnagel, if people are looking for reasons to bet against the Argos, John Hufnagel's been in this position before. Probably one of the greatest coaching speeches in CFL history was the coaching speech that he delivered before the 2008 Grey Cup, when Montreal, that Olympic Stadium, was if it had been any louder, they would have destroyed the foundations of the Olympic Stadium. It was just a powder cake in there. And he had his players, admittedly many different players than are on his roster right now, but still including some of those key components, particularly Nick Lewis. And they basically went in there and they beat the Alouettes. So John Hufnagel knows how to deal with a situation like this. And I'm sure he's really licking his chops at this, particularly now that his team thinks they're the team of destiny, regardless of all the other off-the-field shenanigans they've had. But just to reiterate the point one final time, for all of those of you out there who think that Ricky Ray, this whole trade, has been part of one giant scheme, I've spoken to people in the league, and not just myself, but a lot of people have done their diligence, and there are a lot of good reporters, better reporters, more experienced reporters than I, who have looked into this, and they have said unequivocally, there is nothing rotten about this. There's nothing untoward. There is, like you said very, very correctly, Jen, the league would not sacrifice its own credibility for the sake of the Toronto Argonauts.
Yes, it is very good to have a healthy team in Toronto and to get healthy fan support in Toronto. It is very good for the league. But it's not worth any of the kind of stuff that people are trying to accuse them of. And really, it's just, I've heard lots of crazy theories. I've never bought them. I mean, again, I don't think that Eric Tillman, as we discussed when when people said that he was planning for his own firing, and that, he'd already had stuff in place, that's not his style.
Yeah.
He's not that much of a pre-planner. He is very supremely confident in what he does. That's one of his great assets.
Yeah.
So he's not going to plan for failure, especially not a year in advance.
No, especially now that Jim Barker likely has his job pretty much secured, because I would find it very hard to believe that Chris Rudge is now all of a sudden going to axe Jim Barker after he basically, with all due respect to Coach Barker, he basically helped rebuild a team. But, that's getting away from the point. We're totally just giving, a lot of credence to a lot of, in my humble opinion, a lot of garbage. The fact remains, taking away Ricky Ray from the equation. Look at the game that Ronald Fleming had. Look at the game that Marcus Ball had. 2 interceptions in such a big game. Marcus Ball really, although I, at a time, was on the fence about whether or not he deserved to be Defensive Player of the Year, there's no doubt that there wasn't a player on that Argo team who came out and had particularly a better second half than Marcus Ball. And look at that secondary. Yes, Ahmad Carroll made the mistake that he always makes once a game with that really critical pass interference call before halftime. But you look at Pacino Horn, you look at Jalil Carter, and you look at Evan McCullough. All these guys made plays when they had to. Even though Jamel Richardson had a pretty huge reception, you just talk about a couple plays later, Pacino Horn, taking that ball away. When the Argos needed to make plays, they did. And Milanovic has told us time and again, even doubters like myself, he said, when our team gets behind, when our team gets down, we deal with it. And we've dealt it, and they dealt with it. And you have to not only give credit to Ricky Ray, you got to give credit to all the other pieces as well.
Yeah, and it was a team effort. I mean, it was a good effort, and everybody did something. You didn't see anybody kind of on the field who weren't really working towards the goal. You didn't have anyone kind of coming along for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no doubt about that. And I think hopefully this wasn't their peak, but you talk about the Western Final. Clearly, I think it's pretty true now that the BC Lions hit their peak just before that game a couple weeks ago in Calgary, because Calgary really fed off of that win. We talk about how much the Argos were able to execute going down the stretch. The BC Lions weren't able to do that, and I think now, I don't think there's going to be wholesale changes in BC, because there's no need. The team is still, on paper and based on the stats, the best team in the league. However, execution, when they needed to really prove their worth, and they've talked about it throughout the year with that mantra they had, saying, listen, we have now come to a point where we are the past champions. We're not trying to repeat as champions. I think that kind of began to diminish a little bit, because that depth, that strength in particularly their strategy. Jacques Chapdelaine had some confusing calls. Rich Stubler, though, totally looked like he got out-coached on the other side by Calgary, because in that, for much of the game, Kevin Glenn, John Cornish, Mark-Way McDaniel, Romby Bryant, Nick Lewis didn't really have that big of a game until he got that onside kick reception. But those other pieces didn't have any problem with that BC defense. And really, when it was 31-19, I thought the game was over at the start of the fourth quarter.
I think we'd be remiss not to mention something about, we talked last week about Drew Tate and his head.
Yeah.
Drew Tate doesn't play the game. It has nothing to do with his head.
Yeah. Well, listen, you know what? Either you believe Drew Tate won the game with concussion, or you believe Drew Tate won a major game with a broken arm, or you believe both. The fact is that was an amazing performance. I think the league should have, regardless of however Calgary went ahead and tried to convince that Drew Tate did not get a concussion. Any doctor would tell you, and I've spoken to a few of them, would tell you that the signs and symptoms that Drew Tate exhibited shows that there was some head trauma. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and get on Drew Tate's case because he didn't play the game, and he had ultimately an amazing performance. But I still think, overall in general, it calls into question the league's concussion protocols. Having said all that, Drew Tate had an amazing game, but particularly his receiving core had a fantastic game. And to see for those people who are boosters of John Huffnagel, to see the way he's made this team very much like BC's lineup was in the beginning of the year, a very plug-and-play lineup. To see Kevin Glenn come in and have, besides that one interception return for a touchdown he had to Corey Banks in the first half, to see him come out and throw 3 touchdowns, and not only that, to see Bo Levi Mitchell come out and be as effective as he was too, with that offense, just proves to me that this offense wasn't necessarily based off of one player, wasn't based off of one particular style. This was kind of a multi-form offense that when it needed certain players to perform, it did, and they were totally deserving. And, I could have done without seeing Drew Tate kind of egg on the BC fans, but you can't deny that everyone, regardless of whether Drew Tate was on the field or not, every part of this team has contributed. And we talk about BC's depth. Calgary, for those who don't know, has dealt with a tremendous amount of injuries this year. And they're missing a lot. I mean, R.J. Franklin and Johnny Forzani, who are 2 very important non-import receivers didn't play. Juwan Simpson did not play, and he is their best tackler. He didn't play this game. For them to come out and to use throughout the course of the season over 70 players and to get to the Grey Cup, for those people who are saying that's why John Hufnagel should be the coach of the year, that's exactly why. I'm looking forward to this Grey Cup matchup, not necessarily because this week upcoming, there's going to be tons of storylines. People in my profession won't have enough to write about. Have too much to write about.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to have way too much to write about, not going there enough.
I totally misspoke there. We'll have way too much. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately going to come down to two of the best coaches of the year, in John Hufnagel and Scott Milanovich. And totally, and that's what the best game, that's what a championship game should be in any league.
It's true. Although, we won't have to write about anything regarding, I guess, an errant tweet from any of the Calgary Stampeders, since I assume the radio silence order is still going to be ongoing for the Calgary Stampeders.
And Nick Lewis, I'm not even going to get into. I'm sure.
It was an incredibly stupid thing for him to do.
Yeah.
However, I think donating game paycheck to a women's shelter does do something to help remedy the situation. I'm not sure that you punish the whole team for one person being a moron.
Well, this was the debate that Andrew Buchholz of Yahoo Sports and George Johnson, the columnist for the Calgary Herald, were having. Not a friendly debate, mind you, on Twitter. and the fact is, I kind of sit on the fence. I really do. I sit on the fence of this because it's all about, if you're going to tweet something out, you've got to go ahead and be held accountable for it. And in my estimation, there is no universe. There is no universe there. And whoever Nick Lewis felt he was trying to appeal to with that comedy, I'm sorry, he's got to get a new batch of friends or fans, because that was disgusting, to be quite honest with you. And there's no other way to take it. It's indefensible. And it would have been nice if he had initially come out and said, you know what, I probably should have kept my mouth shut. I'm donating my game check, and you live and you learn. And I think we all would have been over and done with it. But the fact that now John Hufnagel has really had to deprive not just us ink-stained wretches, but really deprive the fans, because the CFL is all about accessibility, and Twitter accounts on the CFL, for some players at least, has really become a source of entertainment for a lot of fans. Case in point, Shamad Chambers and Jerome Messam basically had a back and forth today about how much they missed Ricky Ray while Ricky Ray was slicing through the Montreal Alouettes. That's the kind of stuff that you miss, that you're going to miss this week, particularly from the Calgary Stampeders. But having said all that, in the most important time of the year, you need your team to focus. John Hufnagel needs his team to focus, and he put down the iron fist, and Hufnagel has the rings to prove his authority, and I don't think anybody was going to challenge that.
No, and that's just it. I believe it was not a direct edict that you could not go on social media. I think it was just that he'd prefer it if everyone stayed away.
Yeah, but it was a suggestion that should be taken as a strict rule.
Yes. Well, I was going to say, but it is John Hufnagel, and having met the man, I wouldn't be pushing that envelope if I was any of his players.
No.
So,
no.
It's a sad thing that you're not going to get a lot of those kind of tweets, those pre-game week. But in the same sense, the players who are in the Grey Cup very rarely tweet anything great the week of the Grey Cup anyway.
Yeah, these guys are going to be a ball of nerves. These guys are
and it should be fairly busy.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, if you're not in Toronto, I really, it's unfortunate, because not only are you going to have John Cornish and Nick Lewis and Kevin Glenn, who don't need to be prompted to say something, who are all pretty lively guys to begin with. On the Toronto side, a lot of people out west are going to be introduced to guys like Ahmad Carroll, guys like Mark Ball, and Brandon. Maybe the positive side to Brandon Isaac, because these guys are just, at Argos practice, they're just a handful, and they love what they do, and they're absolutely, this week they were eating up the possibility that they could beat Montreal in Montreal to host the Grey Cup. So fans will, unfortunately, as Andrew Buchholz with Yahoo Sports called it, the gatekeepers. Unfortunately, the gatekeepers will be the guys who are kind of letting letting in, the media, I should say, will be letting in people across the country into the world of the guys who are going to be challenging for Canadian football's top prize. But there'll be no shortage of stories. I mean, unfortunately, Jen, and I do agree with you, there will be something missed not having a little bit of nuance with having guys on Twitter saying what they think and what they feel. Yeah,
I mean, but it is what it is. It's going to be an amazing game. And, I mean, the good news is, I've seen 2 people carried off the field in the last 2 Argos games. Both on stretchers, both, not looking good. Neither one of them turns out to be anywhere near as bad as it looks, which I think is a really good thing. And I think it's saying something about some of the safety protocols that the league has brought in, that it looks, the injuries end up now looking a lot worse than they are, as opposed to 5 years ago when they ended up being a lot worse than they looked.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this league has a really tragic history with Tom Pate and what happened to him, unfortunately, on the field. You don't want to see, like what happened to Matt Nichols last week or Marc-Olivier Boulet this week. Well, that stuff it's, as I said on Twitter, and I don't mind repeating it, it peels away the anger, and it peels away the pads, and it really shows you how scary this game can be. A lot of us across the country can pump our fists and froth our mouths to see guys hammer each other and might scream, hit him and hit him harder. But at the end of the day, we're all still humans, and we're all still very, very fragile. I'm glad that the news has been fairly positive. It's still, it's a shocking thing to happen to anybody. But like you said, Jen, hopefully, that's the one thing we get out of the Grey Cup. No matter who wins, hopefully we won't have one of those tragic situations where we're basically on pins and needles hoping that a player is okay, because this is a rough game, and no matter where your allegiance lies, you don't want to see someone get tragically injured.
No, and I mean, and that's just it. Like, you can be a fan, and that's one of the other things. You can be a fan of. It's very hard to be a fan of any one team in this league without actually being at least respectful or somewhat of a fan of every other team in this league.
Yeah.
Am I happy the Argos have made it? Yes. Has it made my life a lot more complicated during Grey Cup week? Yes. But I would, and I said when I said it on Twitter, I meant it. I would have been just as pumped for the Grey Cup were the Argos not there. Like, I remember the 91 Grey Cup because it was the first time in a lot of time that, they had won. And it was the first time, you had pinball, and it was a great feeling. And I'm hoping that this will come back. In the same sense, though, I as much as I may not want to see Montreal again, just because they've been there a bunch of other times, I also know that it would still be a great game. No matter which of the Final Four teams had made it, it's going to be an amazing 100th Grey Cup game. And now that Cineplex is doing I think it's $5 and you can go watch it on the big screen. If you don't have a ticket, that seems like a really good option.
I mean, what people don't, and I think what people sometimes, and I think this is a good thing to kind of round everything out on, the fact of the matter is that this is the 100th anniversary of the biggest. People can go ahead and they can say what they want about the Stanley Cup, and that's fine. But because that really, really important trophy has been I think become part of a business model, I think it's lost a little bit of its cachet. The Grey Cup there's still a stronger sense of community and accessibility about the Grey Cup than there is about the Stanley Cup, and there's no doubt about it. Hockey is still our national sport, our national winter sport, but there's something about the Grey Cup that's always kind of dug a little deeper for a lot of people in this country. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And to reach out to those other Canadians who still are on the fence or maybe dismiss the CFL, I think is the ultimate goal of the 100th Grey Cup, regardless of the teams that we're playing in. And I think you'll find that. To have the Argos in, I think, hopefully is the start of something, because as I'm sure, as I vaguely remember, and as you no doubt remember, Jen, the last big Argos game inside the Rogers Centre was the 1991 Eastern Final, where it was just jam-packed. And I think to have a little bit of that back would be so beneficial to the city, because the fact is people across the country don't care But in this city, in Toronto, people have been starved for a winner. So to even have a little bit of that is fantastic. But that's not the point of the 100th Grey Cup. The 100th Grey Cup, honestly, is just about that community and that accessibility and reminding people of what this one special game does to our country. It brings everybody together from coast to coast. It doesn't matter if you watch CFL at any other point in the year. People have Grey Cup parties, and you can just look at the stats and the facts. Millions upon millions upon millions of Canadians watch the Grey Cup. And it's just become such an important part of who we are over the last, particularly the last 25 years, although there have been some peaks and valleys, that I think we can't understate how important this game is. And at the end of the day, it's just about, again, in propagating that sense that the Grey Cup is just more about who we are and about the strength of our community as Canadians.
Agreed. And, I mean, even if you don't have tickets to the game, come out. If you're in the Toronto area or Southern Ontario, come on out this week to some of the Grey Cup activities. I mean, it's going to be a great week of, tons of different stuff. A lot of it is free. You can go down and explore from the festival areas, Yonge and Dundas Square. I mean, basically, a lot of downtown Toronto is now very into the Grey Cup. So it doesn't cost anything. Come on down.
Yeah, I'm not going on that zip line, though. They have a zip line in the.
You're not going on it?
No, I refuse to go on it, not because of any other reason than so many things can happen when you're stuck on a zip line, several, dozens upon dozens of feet in the air with a harness around my waist that is not going to be comfortable at all. I'm sure people across from several parts of the country will be intrigued because Toronto really does have kind of an interesting skyline. You get to see, from everything I've been told about the zip line, that you really get to engage the real urban centers. You're going down the wire. I don't care. I don't want a harness around my waist, and I don't want to be gliding down a piece of very thin wire. I mean, I don't have a fear of heights, but I do have a fear of just mechanical and simple mistakes, and I really don't want to be stuck there up that high. But anyways,
but there's so many other things to come and do. There's a whole lot of great parties going on. If you've never been to the Spirit of Edmonton, you need to go. You just need to go. I can't explain it if you haven't been there, but there are no words to explain what that room is like until you go and you witness it, and then you'll understand. But go to some of the events, go to something, feel involved with the Grey Cup, do something, feel involved with this, because it is our game and it is our history.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said any better myself, Jen.
I've been talking with Matt Scianitti, who will be covering the Grey Cup for CFL.ca, and I will be there covering it for Rouge Radio.
Hey, you. Yeah, you with that sandpaper and paintbrush getting ready to sand and paint that wooden fence again this year, when you could be sitting back, relaxing on your patio and watching your neighbors do that work. Get rid of that wood fence and easily install a new low-maintenance resin fence that lasts. Visit Keter.com, Keter.com, for videos, product information, and more. You can find this fence at some Costco's across North America and always at Costco.ca with shipping right to your door. Keter.com.
And welcome to Rouge Radio, and this is Championship Edition for the CIS playoffs. I'm Kevin Garbuio, joined along with Donnovan Bennett from The Score. Donnovan, what do you think of this week's games?
They were the four teams that everyone expected to see in the Bowls, everyone wanted to see, and I think everyone in the end got the Vanier rematch that they wanted to see after a game for the ages in 2011 at BC Place. To have another game like that in a dome where the elements and the time of year won't be a factor, with two proud programs, it's shaping up to be a pretty special game. The Bowls that we had to get us to that point were not special at all. We saw some special performances from players, but in essence, those games were not great. But I think come Friday night, it will be a classic.
Well, just recapping the games itself, both games lopsided. The year before, both semifinals were lopsided. Calgary and Acadia both seasons just taking it on the chin from Laval and McMaster respectively. This week, Acadia traveled to Laval, and we saw the Laval just run all over them. Acadia needing to play a perfect game. Even if they did, I don't think they would have come up with it. Why do you think that this has been happening, and what needs to change for the AUS just to be relevant right now.
Well, I don't think it's even an Acadia-specific issue. I think Coach Cummins and their staff does a great job, and they really have transformed that program from being kind of also-rans in the AUS to being the elite program in the AUS. But I think it's an AUS issue. I think when you look at when their teams were dominant, when St. Mary's was going to the Vanier and, in contention for winning it, you look down their two-deep roster. They had a lot of kids from Ontario. Now that the scholarships are more prevalent in Ontario, a lot of those Ontario talented kids are staying home. So they're not stealing kids out of the Ontario. So now their grassroots programs in the Maritimes have to kind of, speed up so that they can provide their own talent, because a lot of the kids they're getting are kids from Ontario that didn't necessarily have opportunities to stay in Ontario that they liked. So you're getting kind of the second-rate recruited kids from Ontario. So that's why I think, their talent level is down. When you look at the elite teams in Quebec, when you look at the elite teams in Ontario, you look at their rosters, they're kids from those areas. And look at Laval. A lot of their kids are from Quebec City or from the surrounding area. Same thing with McMaster. A lot of their kids are from Hamilton or Burlington, Oakville, the surrounding area. So they're winning their recruiting wars at home. And those two football organizations, both in Quebec and Ontario, at a minor level, both in summer football, but also in the high school level, is doing a great job of preparing their athletes and grooming their kids. And that's why when you look at the CFL draft, not only just the prospects list, but the kids actually getting drafted, a lot of them are coming from either Ontario or Quebec. So that's why I think you're seeing the AUS struggling in the national semifinals, and also the CanWest, albeit it's been Calgary representing them, but the CanWest struggling in the national semifinals unless they're playing the AUS. So I think the two conferences, the Ontario OUA and the Q, have separated themselves a bit from the other two because they're keeping their kids, they're developing them well. The regular seasons are very serious, and there's a lot of intense games, and that just prepares teams for the intensity that is the national semifinals. And you saw two teams in Laval and McMaster who, from the jump, were very intense, played for 60 minutes, and that's why they're going to continue to play this Friday. So I think the AUS, people think that you're bashing the AUS if you say something negative about them. The reality is it's a 4-team league, and things are cyclical, and, there's a random chance that those 4 teams, you might not get one that is in the top 4 in the country. It's just simple mathematics. Acadia is a top 10 team, but they're probably at the bottom half of that top 10. So when you only have 4 teams in a league, things like that are going to happen. There's going to be years and stretches where one of those 4 teams isn't amongst the top 4 or 5 in the country, and I think that's what we have right now.
Well, just to put it in perspective, I was talking before the game with J.P. Charest, and he was just going over players on Acadia because I'm familiar with him being the AUS guy. And I'm going through it, and he goes, what about this DB? What about this DB, this DB? I said, well, they haven't really been tested, so I can't say much. And he's like, so the weak half and the strong half both haven't been tested? Well, teams don't really throw too much outside the hashes in the AUS. And that's why you see Laval with a quarterback who can throw anywhere on the field. That's something I think that also goes to what you're saying. The talent level in the AUS and the players that they're recruiting just don't seem to be up to the national standard.
And, it happens on both sides. And we saw Kyle Quinlan have great success throwing against them on the road last year in the UTEC. And so when you have quarterbacks that aren't developed and aren't able to, make all the throws on the field, you're not developing your skill players, you're not developing your wide receivers because they're not giving the opportunity to make plays in practice and in games. Then you have corners in a conference who aren't asked to, be in complex defenses and make plays on the ball and break on the ball quickly. So when you have, great quarterbacks and great passing games in Quebec, like we see at Sherbrooke and we see at Montreal and at Laval, or you have great quarterbacks like we see at Western and McMaster, at Guelph and at Queens, defending these guys, and it's a league-wide issue. So then the schemes become more adept to high-level Canadian passing where the entire field is in play. And for me, it's a great observation by you. Acadia, they coming out defending, they tried to shrink the field, not respecting that Laval was going to be able to make throws all over the field. And I think that was the difference. That they were able to, on defense, Laval was able to make Acadia play left-handed, took away what they wanted to do, took away their run with Troop, and forced them to make plays throwing the ball. And other than, a blown coverage and a long touchdown pass, they weren't able to sustain offense throwing the football. Whereas Laval, they were able to, think and dunk what they wanted to, and then when the time was right, they were able to stretch the field with great success.
Well, they one drive, the pivotal drive in the third quarter after Acadia scored a touchdown, they answered with just an inside zone, outside zone, inside zone, down the field with great success, running 2 run plays. So it just shows the level of coaching that, and not even so much coaching, but the level of just preparedness that they are in the Quebec conference. And then now going into the OUA, I've heard people saying that the OUA's evolved from just a run conference, and we're looking at McMaster with Kyle Quinlan, who could also just do the same thing over and over, and no one can seem to stop him.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's a tribute to the summer football in Ontario and the amount of reps that quarterbacks are now getting at a high level, not just playing high school football, but transferring that to the summer, where Ontario has been able to develop great quarterbacks. You talk about, the guys that have come through before, like the Hessels and the Dennisons and the Brannigans and the Folds and the Sinopolis and the Scobys and the Dunks. But you look right now, you've got a guy like Austin Kennedy. Obviously, Quinlan is great. Billy McPhee and Jazz Lindsay. Will Finch is coming up. But even the quarterbacks who have left Ontario and helped other programs, let's not forget that Kyle Graves is from Ontario, and that Eric Glavich helped St. Mary's and went to Calgary and helped them as well, a guy from Ontario. So the amount of football that guys are playing in the summer in Ontario, I think, is the reason why we're seeing great quarterbacking come from Ontario and why we've transferred from a run-dominant conference when we were seeing great yards put up by guys like Lumsden and Stevenson to a conference that's really throwing the football all over the field. And also, when you think of the infusion of minds in the OUA that have spent time in and around the CFL game, Greg Marshall, obviously, Steph Fatasic played in the CFL, Joe Powpow was a play caller for many years in the CFL. So when you have that at this level, it permeates throughout the conference, and then the passing games become a bit more expanded, and you see great success when you get to this level of football, the bowl level, where the route concepts haven't been as sophisticated for teams in other conferences.
Well, now just moving on with the playoffs, you mentioned earlier, making a great point. Acadia ranked consistently this year at the bottom of the top 10. They were top 10. No one's taking that away from them, but they were at the bottom of it. What could we see to change maybe the playoff structure that we don't get so many blowouts in these semifinals? I believe Neat Sager was posting that in games that aren't Laval versus an Ontario team in the semifinals, the average margin of victory has been 29.7 points. So what could we do to change that and make the games a bit more competitive?
I mean, that's just a mind-blowing stat. And I get, crushed on Twitter for being, an Ontario and an OUA homer. And, I mean, I'm obviously from Ontario. I play in Ontario. I cover Ontario football. So it is what I know. But the other thing that I know is that we shouldn't make a knee-jerk reaction to what we're seeing in the last couple of years. Just because the AUS, for all intents and purposes, is down, and, the Can West has been dominated by Calgary, but they haven't, acquitted themselves as much as Blake Nill and that program would have wanted to in the bowls in the last couple of years. I don't think we can radically just throw out, the baby with the bathwater and change the entire system. But I do also know that we have to take a serious look at the amount of teams playing football and where they're located on the map. We're going to have, upwards of 10 teams in Ontario, 11, 12 teams in Ontario. We've obviously, we've got 6 in the Q, 6 in Can West, which is, on a map stretches, a big part of the province, and obviously 4 in the AUS. So when you look at the Q in Ontario, and you're talking about almost 20 of the teams, almost 2/3 of the teams playing football are situated in the middle of the country, in close proximity in these two bordering provinces. That's a lot of football concentrated in that area, a lot of teams concentrated in that area, but yet only 2 bowl berths come from that area. So I suppose I don't have an elixir that would fix this problem, but I do know that it is a bit of an issue that I don't know if the best way to do it is each conference gets a berth, because some of the conferences are weighted more. I'm not saying that we need to go to an electoral college type system where your berth is relative to how many people are in the province or the area that you're covering, or how many players. But I do know that I'm not sure if it makes sense that you have such a high quantity of teams in one area, yet they're only represented by 2 teams at the national semifinal. But when you look at the model in the States and the NCAA, they clearly don't have that figured out as well either. So it becomes a slippery slope when we're talking about putting teams who haven't won their conference in a national semifinal, which some people have proposed. Maybe making the AUS has to play an at-large game with the highest-ranked team from another conference, the remaining team that didn't win their conference. So maybe it would be a Montreal or a Queens or a Western, depending on how the chips fall. But that's slippery as well, because you look in Quebec, Montreal, who would have been ranked, probably that at-large team, they didn't even make the Dunsmore Cup. They lost to Sherbrooke. So then does Sherbrooke then have a right to play in a national semifinal above an AUS team? So I'm not certain we need to jump to make changes right now. I think we should take a step back and see how this thing plays out over a larger sample size. I do know that in the OUA and in the Q, the playoffs pretty much start in the regular season. And, if you see the intensity of the Montreal and Laval home and homes, those were like playoff games, because they know how much, coming out of those back-to-back games means to where you'll finish overall at the end of the year. And we saw it this year with, Laval, getting the best of those 2 games, and the point differential means they got to skip past Sherbrooke until, the Dunsmore Cup, and Montreal was upset by a tough Sherbrooke team. So I think it's a good thing when, the playoffs start in the regular season in college football. But it's obviously a bad thing when the national semifinals, the big games, the games that everyone's getting up for, and the games that we're getting a unique audience for that may not have watched all year, are a bit of a letdown. We want to be showing off the best of our product and showing the closest, most exciting games at the end of the year. So I think it's something that it's good to have the discussion, and it's good to promote ideas and talk about it, but I don't think we should make, an ill-advised decision on it too quickly.
I agree with that, but the beauty of this system is the 2 best teams are playing in the championship. And could we just get some predictions and some thoughts on that? You followed McMaster all year. You know about Laval. How great of a matchup is this?
It's a great one. And I mean, as flawed as the system may be, we've had the 2 best teams in the championship for back-to-back years. So at the end of the day, we are getting the best teams, and these are the best teams for me in the best programs. And it starts from the top down. It's a trickle-down effect. And for me, you have 2 of the best coaches, and their teams are very different, but they're the same in one way. They're efficient in their practice time. They recruit well. They don't over-recruit. And everyone who comes through the program gets better year in, year out, week in and week out. You can say that about both programs, and you can say that about McMaster's defense. It grew up throughout the year. They were kind of along for the ride last year. Now they've stepped to the front of the table, and they're making a lot of big plays. And you can say that also about Laval's offense. They've sped up their learning process, and, with some changes on the offensive coaching staff, they're now clicking on all cylinders. So we had a great offense and a great defense defense and McMaster and Laval, respectively, to start the year, the other units have picked up the pace, and now we've got two great teams. In this game, I'm still looking forward to seeing, the Kyle Quinlan, go up against guys like Plessius and try and make plays. But I think the game, for all intents and purposes, might be one on the other side of the ball. Who wins that best of the best kind of second-hand matchup? And in these two teams that, again, stylistically are different. Mac with a lot of team speed on both sides of the ball, and they wore out Calgary by just running to the football and running away from them on offense. And I think they wore them out cardiovascularly. I think they were in better shape, and they were still firing off the ball and still running with high intensity late in that game. And when Calgary got down, they got frustrated. They took some bad penalties. Where Mac, they wore on Acadia physically. They beat them up at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, redetermined the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And I just think, they gave them so many body punches that, in that second and third quarter, they were able to throw some haymakers and take that one away. So stylistically, very different, and I think that makes for a great fight. That's why we saw a great game a year ago, and I expect this one to be just as good.
Care to make any predictions on it? See another Mac repeat, or do you think it's just this one's too close to call right now?
It is. It's too close to call. I mean, I thought the Calgary Mac game was going to be extremely close, and I clearly was wrong there. So maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. I think it's going to be close, and I'll say this: I know that Laval is going to be ready from the opening kickoff. Maybe they were looking, past McMaster a little bit and looking to hoist that trophy last year because, for all intents and purposes, with the amount of future CFLers that were on that Calgary Dino squad a year ago, they thought that was going to be their toughest test. But they'll be ready this year. They've, played close attention to what the defending Vanier Cup champions have done all year. They really worked system-wise on having more speed on the edges because they felt like that was a big place where they lost the ball game, especially early on. So I think that you're going to get a concerted effort for them. When they get to the Vanier Cup, historically, other than last year, they end up bringing it home. And maybe that kind of set in like, okay, we've got here. That's the toughest part for us. Once we get here, we know we're going to win. I think they were left with a bad taste in their mouth, in both system-wise, but also, kind of culturally. They've realized that, McMaster is a strong program. They're here to stay, and they are going to take our best effort full on, and that's what it's going to take to beat them. So I expect to see an engaged, Laval team very early. A humble team through the week in the media, but an engaged team, to start and kick off. And a big thing for me was, last year, the Laval guys were, midfield, chirping, jumping up and down, and, Gascon, was giving some, dirty looks to some MAC players, trying to intimidate them off the field, and Mac clearly wasn't intimidated. They fired on all cylinders early. I think the dynamics of the players kind of crossing each other through the halls and whatnot in the hotel throughout the week, I think that will be interesting for me as well, because I think, when we're talking about making history and winning back-to-back Vaniers, Laval's one of the few teams that have done it. So they know how special that is, and I think they want to be the team to stop Mac from, entering the class of, among the great teams of all time. Mac has already got the consecutive win streak away from Laval. I think now they want to put that back-to-back Vanier on their kind of belt as well.
It'll be interesting. I'm excited for it. I think everyone's excited for it. TSN having their documentary on the greatest game ever played coming out. So this is going to be a great weekend. Thanks for joining us, Donnovan. And
no problem. My pleasure.
For Rouge Radio, we'll be back next week.